What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the world's okayest physical therapist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. H, and I hope you will apologize my voice, which is a little bit worn out. The temperature change here seems to have really taken a toll on me. So I'm going to be a little bit more succinct than normal. But today's topic is fascinating, and it is not the last episode. I don't know what I was thinking when I recorded the last one, but this is not the last one. We still have two more to go to make a nice, even 7-episode series here. But today's episode on the inflammation series is going to be focusing on inflamed nerves. Now, again, this is the world's okayest physical therapist podcast. Its intent is to provide education to help us all better navigate this labyrinthine, Byzantine healthcare system that we call the American healthcare system. I'm sharing my lessons learned, my experience, and my knowledge to help all of you better navigate it. And also so that you can have a better conversation with your healthcare providers to figure out the care that you need. Now, you've probably heard people say things like nerve pain or the nerve is inflamed, the nerve is impinged, or all sorts of things like that. And that's going to be what we talk about today. Oh, but also before I forget, please don't forget to check out the links in the description. Check out 10,000. They gave me a code for 15% off that I can share with you. Check out the shop as it's a really helpful way to support the podcast. And also, please consider joining Patreon and liking, sharing, and subscribing and saying this to everyone that you know. Now, like I said, you probably heard about those terms used to describe nerves before. So today we're going to take a look at what happens when a nerve gets caught up in the inflammatory process and how that changes the sensation, movement, and how physical therapy can help calm and retrain the neurological system. So first we're going to start with nerves. Now, a lot of people will compare them to electrical wires, and that's not what they are. They are living tissue. And fun fact, mammalian nerves um, operate by being sheathed. They are surrounded by connective layers that protect them. And um, they also play a role in increasing conduction. So mammalian nerves have this specialized system, real quick, that if you want to imagine like a train is probably the best way you can think of it. Um, the nerves are shielded in large sections, but there are gaps in between those shields. And the reason for that is to allow faster nerve conduction. If you had just a naked nerve with no shielding, it would take much, much, much longer for the signal to transverse the entire length of the nerve. But with a nerve that is shielded in certain positions or certain places, you can increase how fast that nerve fires. And that's one of the reasons why humans are able to move as fast as they can as compared to other animals. So when inflammation occurs, however, it brings fluid, immune cells that we've talked about before, and chemical mediators that we've talked about before that change what happens here. First of all this increased fluid increases the pressure inside of the nerve sheath, which makes it harder for electrical impulses to travel efficiently. And this usually results in slower conduction, abnormal firing, and heightened sensitivity. In short, the inflamed nerve becomes both physically restricted and chemically irritated. A fancy smancy way of saying this would be that it's excitement potential, I think is the correct term. The amount of energy that it takes to excite it is lower, meaning it requires less of a stimulus for this nerve to fire. However, its conduction is slower. So you would have a little bit of a double whammy here already of less stimulus being needed to make it feel anything and respond, possibly in terms of pain. And also it would linger and report pain longer than a healthy nerve. And so delving into this, we'll take a look at how inflammation alters the nerve signaling. When inflammation is present, chemicals like bradykinin, interleukin 1, and substance P, which are all really fancy terms you can Google here, but just know that they exist. They make the nerve's ion channels more excitable, right? This means that the nerve fires easier, even without a strong stimulus. So it now takes less stimulus for that nerve to fire. Think of it like turning up the sensitivity dial on a microphone or on a megaphone, or if you had a security system for your home, it's dialed up the sensitivity to 11. It's constantly on the look for a reason to activate. Suddenly, even a small movement can be evaluated and considered a threat on this highest setting. It's one of the reasons why people with nerve inflammation feel pain from things that normally wouldn't hurt. And this could be like light touch, small movements, increased pressure of the tissue. All of things like this can become painful to a person. And in the immediate, when this happens, within the first few weeks, this is to be expected, right? The brain and the neurological system are literally going to be looking for reasons to find pain. But if this persists over a long period of time, you get something called central sensitization. And central sensitization is where the spinal cord and brain have decided and adapted that this pain response is to be expected even after the tissue has started to heal. It's also something you've probably heard with chronic pain syndrome, CPRS, chronic regional pain syndrome. And basically what's happened is the brain and the tissue has decided to remain extra excitable and to present with pain to stimulus that shouldn't be painful. Now, part of what comes along with this is just knowing this, knowing the fact that the tissues, the nerves are irritated, knowing that the nerves are changing how they fire, knowing and expecting a change in perception of pain and how your tissues work can help combat this from happening, which is one of the reasons why I'm recording this podcast. Is a lot of the patients that I see in the clinic could absolutely benefit from being told, hey, you're hurt, how your nerves fire, how your tissue feels, how excitable they are, how your brain interprets things. All of this is normal. It's only abnormal if your tissue is healing and your brain continues to do this. And a lot of that is predicated on your perception and your expectation of what you should feel and when you should feel it. So moving on here before my voice completely gives out, nerve inflammation versus muscle or joint pain. One of the hardest clinical challenges for a patient is to differentiate between nerve pain from other sources of pain. I'm going to take a sip of something here real quick, so please bear with me. Nerve pain is often described as sharp, burning, electric, or like static. It can radiate and travel, usually along defined paths. These defined paths, if you want to look them up, they're called pain referral patterns. And these pain referral patterns basically say, hey, even though you're presenting with nerve tension or some sort of swelling in this area, you're going to feel the pain in this pattern over here. And that is very, very common. One of the most common ones, actually, you've probably heard of is called sciatica. Muscle pain, by contrast, tends to be dull, achy, and localized. Now, this is different than having a trigger point, right? I've talked about that before. Trigger points can also radiate pain down the muscle belly. But local, focal, I strained my muscle, that tends to be dull, achy, and localized. And you can generally point to that by saying, hey, I feel this dull ache or whatever here. I feel this maybe even throbbing in this area. So, but this is one of the hardest things people can do, is they can learn to differentiate between myofascial pain, musculoskeletal pain, and nerve pain. They're very different things. Inflammation doesn't help with this. It actually blurs the line, because swollen tissues, guess what, are going to be muscular, and they're also going to have compression on the nerves, which is going to irritate them and as a second order effect. So you can have both. You can have muscular and you can have neurological. And a good physical therapist is going to have to tease these two things out with you. They're going to have to be like, okay, what you're feeling here at the surface level is muscular, and what you're feeling here radiating and zinging down your leg or your arm is likely more neurological. And yes, these two things can run together. And in fact, in the acute phase, they often do. So that's one of the reasons why PTs, if you tell someone, hey, I have numbness, tingling, zinging, whatever, running down my legs and my arms, they're going to assess neuromobility. They're going to give you nerve tensioners, or they're going to give you nerve glides, and they're going to try to help the nerves glide, because nerves love a few things. They love blood, they love space, and they love movement. And that's what your physical therapist is going to be trying to do, is going in there and helping restore these things by providing you interventions. I know for myself, I tend to do this all the time. If a patient even seems to be presenting with any sort of neurological differences, I go in and I'm like, hey, let's just do some quick special tests here and see if we find anything. And if I do, I immediately give them the nerve glides as homework. Moving on, neuromobility and fascial connection. So last time we spent a lot of time talking about the fascia. Now we're going to tie in the neural component as well. And like I said, nerves love movement, blood flow, and space. So you can imagine if you have a lot of fascia that are tight, a lot of muscles that are tight, nerves are not going to be happy. If you have things that restrict blood flow, nerves are not going to be happy. And if you have something that's going to restrict a nerve from being able to move the way that it wants to, it's also not going to be happy. And it's going to present with these things, these numbness, this tingling, this zing, and sometimes that pain. So what needs to happen is people need to realize that nerves aren't static. Kind of like a wet spaghetti noodle or a piece of floss, they glide through the surrounding fascia as the body moves. They're not static. When you move, your nerve moves, your neurological system moves. When inflammation occurs, like we talked about last time, this increases the viscosity, the density of the fluid, right? And this can cause adhesions in fascial layers. And suddenly you can see how if you have these adhesions in these fascial layers, the nerve's not going to be able to glide, not without restriction. And this increased tension is going to be interpreted by the nerves as being restricted, and it's going to respond by either saying, hey, I'm numb and I'm tingling, or I'm pain. The restriction amplifies the mechanical stress that's already on the nerve. And what I mean by this is, say, for example, that we're talking about the arm. And say, for example, we're talking about inflammation in the forearm or the wrist. And now add into the fact that not only is there swelling, right, which is going to be impacting the nerves around the wrist and also running up the chain towards the shoulder. Now let's say we also have some sort of adhesions, some sort of muscle tightness, some sort of swelling going up the forearm, up into the elbow, up into the arm. Well, now we have multiple points of contact where the nerve is being squeezed, where things are adhering to it, where things are changing its mechanical stress. And the nerve is already irritated, right? It's already irritated down by the wrist, but now you're adding in multiple layers of contact where it's going to be constricted. It is going to significantly increase the amount or the possibility that it's going to respond with pain, numbness, and tingling, because the nerve now it's trying to tell you, the body, I am inflamed, and I also am under tension at several different points, and I cannot operate normally. Something is going awry over here. I need your attention. Techniques like neural flossing, like I talked about, nerve glides, myofascial release, trigger point release, all of these are things that a physical therapist will do to try to go in there and to restore the functional mobility of the muscle, of the fascia, and to also get the nerve gliding as it should. So combined with soft tissue mobilization, which is what I just talked about, nerve flossing, trigger point release, these movements tend to improve the nerve's mechanical environment and help decrease the sensitivity over time. One, you got the soft tissue mobilization going in there and changing the viscosity, helping get that recycling of extracellular fluid and trying to drive down some swelling. Add in the fact that changeover in fluid is going to get rid of some of those cell signals that are causing inflammation. That's going to change the viscosity. Suddenly the nerve is a little bit less likely to be irritated. And then going in there and releasing trigger points up and away from where the trauma happens. So again, if we take our metaphor of the wrist, if I know the wrist is severely inflamed and upset, I'm not going to go in there and do trigger point release around the wrist. No, I'm going to go look at the bicep, the tricep, and the shoulder. I'm going to go all the way up to where the nerve begins coming out of the neck. And I'm going to make sure that there is no tension and the scalene. So I'm gonna make sure there's no tension in the upper trap. I'm gonna make sure there's no tension in the triceps and the biceps. So that way the nerve is set up for optimal success. If it's gonna be adhered to, if it's gonna be tight, if it's gonna be impinged at the wrist where I can't go in there and work on it, that's fine. I can't beat that right now, but I am gonna beat all the tension everywhere else that I can. That's how I approach it anyway. And so moving on, let's take a look at how PT calms the inflamed nerves a little bit more in depth. It might shock you to hear the number one way that PTs do it, drum roll, is not soft tissue. It's not nerve glides. The number one thing PTs can do is educate, and they can help the patient understand what's going on with their body, why they feel more inflamed, why they feel agitated, and they can help teach the patient how to perceive what's happening. Kind of shocking, right? The first thing and most important thing you can do is educate. That's why I'm doing a podcast on this. That's why I'm doing a podcast in general. Education is your greatest tool. The nervous system can overreact while going through the healing process, and helping patients understand this and then to perceive what's actually going on can be one of the best ways to make sure that that overreaction is understood by the brain, and that you and your brain, your body, it begins to look for reasons to heal instead of reasons to fear. Graded movement, gentle, pain-free movement like the isometrics that we talked about previously can help desensitize the nerve and retrain the muscles, and also restore normal normal neurological signaling. Rhythmic exercise is another one that helps the brain get used to stimulus and a little bit of movements and resisting forces a little bit more than isometrics. Manual therapy, of course, the soft tissue mobilization, the trigger point release, going in there, helping tissues glide normally, get back to their movement, decreasing any sort of tension on the nerves, and also decreasing the viscosity, as we talked about, can help decrease the tension on those nerves, and also enhance circulation, as we talked about before. And the neurodynamic techniques, which is the nerve glides, and even some specific strengthening motions or stretches can help reduce the tension as well. One of the most classic examples of this, of course, is the piriformis stretch. The sciatic nerve tends to get impinged around the piriformis. So by going in there and doing a simple myofascial stretch of the piriformis, you can reduce the possibility of having sciatic nerve pain due to piriformis syndrome. So simple as going in and doing stretches and or nerve glides can be the key to helping address this inflamed nerve. Over time, though, the goal of all of these things together is to reduce hypersensitivity and rebalance the connection between tissues, nerves, and the brain. Now, the final piece of this puzzle is the brain. So when inflammation no longer persists. I wish inflation no longer persisted, but when inflammation persists longer than it should, that's the brain becoming more involved. Chronic inflammation is going to change how the brain maps the pain, and it's going to change how the brain perceives stimulus. So making sure that chronic inflammation doesn't occur is one of PT's biggest goals. If it does occur, physical therapy can address this through what's called graded exposure, which is basically neurologically retraining the brain using very light stimulus to relearn what is safe stimulus. This is a podcast. I could do a whole episode on this in the future, but basically the idea is to help turn the volume down by slowly introducing stimulus that the brain can tolerate. And then after it, by stimulus, I mean literally going in and doing light touching. One of the first things that I've seen other PTs do with this is like 2-point discrimination. If a person's forearm is extremely painful months after the injuries occurred and they're having chronic inflammation or chronic regional pain syndrome, CRPS, then what you can do is you can start with 2-point discrimination. Can the brain tell 2 different points on the arm or the leg apart? And from there, you can work into light brushing, and from there, you can work into light movement, and so on and so forth. Again, it's an entire podcast that I could do. But if you're really interested in it, you can look up graded exposure physical therapy, and you can see what I'm talking about there. And perhaps in the future, I'll do an episode on that. But the idea again is to turn the volume down, provide safe stimulus that the brain can recognize as safe so it can begin toning down its expectation of pain and harm. And this is the bridge that physical rehabilitation, physical therapy, and neuroscience. It's helping the body feel safe to move again, feeling safe with the stimuluses that it's receiving. That way it no longer perceives them as a threat. So today, we explored how inflamed nerves behave different, how pressure, chemistry, and movement restrictions can all amplify pain, how physical therapy uses movement, education, and manual work to help restore this system. In the next episode, we'll put it all together, how inflammation moves from cell to tissue to nerve, and how from how inflammation moves from the cell to the tissue to the nerve, and how physical therapy integrates everything we've talked about from isometrics, fascia to neurodynamics to guide healing and to restore optimal movement. So thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share this with everyone that you know. I hope that this helps educate you and that you can share this with everybody. Now, everybody, stay fit, stay healthy, and stay awesome. And I will catch you all in the next episode.